Today we have Greg Janess, who lives in Berkeley and rides with the San Francisco Randonneurs. He completed PBP 2023 in a time of 83 hours and 33 minutes, just under his 84-hour time limit. Greg, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
We're off to a great start. Okay. I like to start with this question always. What does completing PBP mean to you?
I was I looked at this question since I had these questions a little bit earlier, and initially I had a lot of different ideas, but I think the main one is it means that I'm alive. Like that's
Okay.
probably the biggest thing, and that being 51, my life is very much not over, and there are new challenges I can have, and some of that is a real growing process. We don't need to dig deep into this, but I used to be very, very heavily into skateboarding.
Okay.
And I very much know there was a high watermark of how good I could ever be before it became, now I'm old enough that I'll get hurt trying to do
Yeah.
some of the stuff I did before.
Yeah.
So I know I'm as good as I could ever be in that. There might be a couple things I could still learn, but not in the same way of putting my body in danger.
Yeah.
And cycling fits that hole for me really, really well
Yeah.
of being able to challenge myself.
Yeah, that's a really
Yeah.
interesting one. I haven't heard it answered in that way before, Greg. Like skateboarding, I've
Yeah.
never skateboarded, but I'm a huge fan of what people do. But there is that drop off, very quick drop off as you get a little bit
Yeah.
older, and you're not doing it as an older person. Whereas cycling, you can do it for a very, very long time. Cool.
Well, it's pain you can sustain that isn't necessarily an injury.
Yeah.
With skateboarding, I knew I was trying the times when I was limping or couldn't walk. That meant I tried that day. If I didn't fall, I wasn't
Yeah.
trying.
Yeah.
But with bikes, I can really feel like I did something and be able to do it another day again
Yeah.
without having to, I don't know, take a week off because I broke a bone or something.
Yeah.
Not that you
Excellent.
can't have something that bad happen in cycling, but it's
Yeah.
skateboarding. It's right there constantly.
Yeah. I think the decline is less dramatic in biking, thankfully.
Yeah.
How did you feel at the finish line? Do you remember that?
Uh, well, all of us, I would say, would be tired, exhausted, uh, thrilled, but not in a way that I could deeply feel yet. Like it was more of a kind of a disbelief. Like,
Yeah.
did I really just do that thing that we'll get into this more, but that I've been thinking about doing for a few years?
Yeah.
And in my mind, I knew it was possible, but physically, I wasn't absolutely sure. So yeah,
And when
thrill and
did
relief.
yeah, okay. And
Yeah.
then when
Yeah.
did a kind of a more deep satisfaction come to light? Was it weeks, months?
There was the next day, actually, there was a huge moment for me where this is going to sound crazy for anyone thinking of doing PvP. It takes a state of mind, I guess. But the day after PvP, I went for a bike ride. Um,
That is
and it,
crazy.
it, wa- it wasn't,
I thought you were going to say you went skateboarding, but that's okay. All right.
no, I did a 20-mile ride from Rambouillet
Yeah.
with some dirt. Um, I asked around and we had a signal group, several people from the San Francisco Randonneurs who were there.
Yeah.
So I asked around, anyone know of some dirt I could go to from here? And Noah Swartz, actually, who you've also interviewed, mentioned that another person, Dan Baring-Hilly, who had ridden PVT in a previous year.
Yeah.
So I like looked at his Strava and scrolled through until I could find routes he did that he'd
Yeah.
done right before PVP. But anyway, that's way out there. I'm going all over the place on that.
Yeah.
But I went out, rode on my own. It was actually kind of nice to just be like, there was no time pressure. There was
Yeah.
no group. There was no control I needed to get to. And I just had this huge smile, like anyone who would have seen me at that point, because I was just looking around like I'm in France. It's so beautiful. And
Yeah.
somehow my body still works today.
Yeah. Amazing. That's
So,
cool.
so yeah,
It's really cool.
I'm so glad I did that ride. It was that my body
That's
could allow me to do it still.
that's great. So maybe let's go back to the start. Tell me about your background in cycling, first memory on a bike, anything that comes
Mhm.
to mind.
Uh, I'm actually going to go slightly before bikes.
Yeah.
I very much remember my dad coming home from a business trip with a big wheel. And I got this big wheel that I rode all over our house and everywhere
Oh,
outside our house. And I just
yeah.
like I did pedaling and moving myself. Um, I was so excited by that. And then I got a bicycle. I'm not sure how old I was then, maybe 6 or 7, maybe with the big wheel.
Yeah.
And then I think around 8, I probably got my first bike with training wheels. And then my older brother, he's 9 years older than me, taught me how to ride the bike without training wheels.
Yeah.
I very much remember that. And then I always had BMX bikes as a kid. And I grew up in rural Nevada, Fallon, Nevada. It's an hour east of Reno. And grew up at a time where, as a kid, you could just go ride your bike all over with some friends and
Yeah.
build jumps, and parents weren't watching. You could do all kinds of crazy stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and then, because where I lived, the only way out of town was to drive. So then it was moved to, plus I was getting so heavily into skateboarding. Cycling took a back seat to that.
Yeah.
Um, and then I didn't rediscover bike until after high school, a few years after. I had lived in San Diego briefly for skateboarding stuff. Actually won a bike at some, I don't remember what it was at all, some kind of mountain bike from a burrito place or a taco
Yeah.
place in Reno.
Yeah.
And I was in San Diego trying to be a pro skateboarder, but had to get a job, and was doing valet parking. And I was ride this bike to work. And then it got stolen.
Yeah.
And then I didn't have a bike for a couple of years again. Then went back to Reno, went to college, and would drive a few miles to get to the campus, but then would have to like circle the neighborhoods for like 30 minutes to find a
Jeez.
parking spot and then walk 20 minutes to my class. And I'm like, there are bike racks right at the building. And then I started riding a bike to school. And then I moved close enough to the school that I could walk to my classes, but I still had to get to work, which was at a different place for valet parking, a casino in downtown Reno. So I would ride my bike to the valet parking job to park people's cars. I'd
Yeah.
ride my bike. And I'd always love leaving on my bike, watching everyone wait in line to get their cars. And I'm just like,
It's
bye.
wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And all those bikes were mostly single speed. I
Yeah.
ended up with some like a Navara Buzz, I think it was like an REI brand that was a 1x5 that
Yeah.
someone at work sold me. Had that for a bit, and then ended up with this 80s Peugeot that I still have, that
Wow.
a friend who worked in a bike shop. It's like, oh, someone came in, the derailleur broke, so they just bought a new bike. They didn't want to do anything with this bike. It's too big for everyone here. I'm 6'2", and like the person trying to give it to me, I think was like 5'9" or 5'10", but it was a little too big for him. But yeah, I still have that bike,
That's cool.
and eventually put a geared hub on it. But um, maybe that's enough for how I got into bikes, and I can get
Cool.
into what
Yeah.
led me to PBP, other rides.
Yeah. Well,
If
I
we
have a
talk more.
follow up then about BMX because I
Sure.
know I never really grew up with that at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, it was probably you're 51, I think, is that what you said? So
Yeah.
maybe it was
Yeah.
big in the 80s, I suppose, or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's very adjacent to skateboarding, perhaps.
Mhm.
Was that kind of like a gateway to skateboarding, or they were very separate?
I was into both at the same time. And I was really lucky. I had very, very supportive parents of my passions, and
Yeah.
activities. And my dad helped me build a half pipe in our yard,
Wow.
and taught me a lot about building. Like I've tried to build a lot of stuff. I think, well, like that cat thing. This is the hole for cats back here that I built in my house.
That's cool.
But yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I like building stuff with wood. But skateboarding took over at that time, and it was like the bike ended up just leaning against a wall inside, and it would like I actually have some
Yeah.
photos of me skateboarding. You can see the bike
Yeah.
sadly sitting in the
Yeah.
background, not being
It,
used.
was the culture similar between BMX and skateboarding?
Yes and no. There's also I don't know if I want to call it a rivalry, but there is a battle for terrain.
Yeah. Okay.
Especially as skate parks came about. More skate parks were built, which wasn't in the 80s, but
Yeah.
more 90s, 2000s. Um, and it's skateboards and bikes do not flow through a skate park in the same way. The
Yeah.
lines are different.
Yeah.
There's a lot of conflict points if you have someone going at the speed of a bike versus speed of a skateboard. Um, and also my skateboarding hat on. From a skateboarding point of view, bikes and their pegs will damage the
Yes.
coping, the top of the lip and the bowl, and make it so it's really hard to skateboard it because it's so damaged by that. Um, So there's
It's
always
yeah.
always been kind of a conflict. What you're
Yeah,
saying, right?
limited capacity
Yeah,
basically, and there's
yeah,
always conflict. Luckily,
yeah.
road biking, there's no limited capacity. Anyone can ride on the road. Yeah,
Right. Well, then it's the cars versus the bikes instead of the
that's true. That's true.
bikes versus the skateboards.
Yeah. I have
If-
a last
yeah,
random question. So, do
sure.
you think there's kind of a skateboarding vibe coming into riding now, like with gravel and like I look at some of these sort of alternative cycling, YouTube channels, like just even like magazines. I
Hmm.
think it's less road racing. It's more skateboarding, I would say.
Yeah, I've never like I don't relate to what would be called a roadie, and I have nothing against people
Yeah.
who identify as what people would consider a roadie,
Yeah.
but that's not me. I like one of my bikes is a cross bike, and that's probably one of the ones most closely related to kind of a skateboarding vibe. Like
Yeah.
they have like a shirt even, which is like where skateboarders go to die. Like
That's
right,
good.
right. And when it comes to gravel and dirt, there is well, even just riding a bike down the street, like someone who drives everywhere sees the world in a very different way than someone on a bike does.
Yeah.
And and people who don't skateboard see the world a very different way than people who do. So it's a non-traditional way of seeing the world. I think in like both of them can really be that.
Yeah.
And gravel might take it even to more of an extreme because you're not just using the roads differently, but you're using trails differently or you're looking for different ways to connect.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, mostly that are away from cars. But and there's that this will be the skateboard on me too, but I when you're a skateboarder, you're told not to do things constantly. Everywhere you
Yeah.
go, it's no skateboarding, no skateboarding. Like skateboarders and pigeons are kind of treated the same way. It's like if we
Yeah.
just put things to make them not be here, they'll just go away. It's like,
Yeah.
no, they'll just go on top of the thing that you
Yeah.
are putting there to keep them from going there, or they'll figure out a different way to use it.
Yeah.
But in bike, like I see a gate. Um, I the skateboarder in me definitely wants to go over that gate and see what's behind it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. That's really interesting.
So
Um, Last comment and then I can move on. But that cross bike when we rode last, which is probably a long time ago, I remember really
mhm.
admiring it, thinking, yeah, that brand looks very different from a standard kind of traditional French, bike or a road racing bike. Seem more
Yeah,
kind of skateboardy.
yeah,
Cool. Okay, maybe we should get back to PBP. It's in the
sure,
title after all. Okay, good.
sure.
How did you originally hear about PBP?
So I think I first saw the words Paris, Brest, Paris on possibly the poster you have in the background. Like I think I
Yep.
saw it at a poster
Yep.
shop 30 years ago or something. Like, but it didn't register as a thing that I could ever be connected to. It was just like, oh, some historical thing.
Yep.
Um, and I just knew the imagery, but had no idea what it actually meant. And at the time, didn't research it. And then around 2019 is when maybe late 2018, I think it was mostly 2019. I was just looking for some kind of riding to do that would be not racing, but I'm like, I know I want to ride more. And I was doing a whole lot of riding by myself. And not all, but most of my longtime friends I know through skateboarding, very few of them got into bikes. A couple
Yeah.
did, but for the most part, they didn't want to ride as much as I did. So they'd ride around town, but they wouldn't want to go on a longer ride. So I was doing all these rides just by myself. I didn't have a group of friends to ride with. Um, and I know you've heard this before with other people you've talked to, Noah specifically, Noah Schwartz is what I'm thinking of. Um, in 2008 and 2009, I rode Eighth Life Cycle.
Yep.
And that was my first experience with long rides. And I loved that experience, but hadn't found something else to do. So I had that in the back of my mind 10 years later. Somehow the 10 years flew by.
Yeah.
But now I was like, I really need another thing and I need an event. And then it aligned perfectly because I learned about it in 2019. So it was too late to even try to do it that year. There was no way. But 2023 is the year I turned 50. And I wanted something. Not only did I want to ride bikes more, but I wanted to find something to do the year I turned 50 that I'd be proud of. And aligned perfectly time-wise for me.
Yeah, it is interesting. 50 seems to be a critical age for many PBP
Yeah.
people. I think I did my first one when I was 50, and I think it's the average age or something. That's cool.
We
Um,
can still do things. Look at us.
indeed, we just can't
But
skateboard. Okay.
we still
Um,
can, just not the same way.
okay. So tell me about like then how did you kind of figure out a strategy for PBP? How did you, well, maybe start with qualifications and then how you
Mhm.
started formulating how you would approach the actual ride.
So once I learned about PvP, then it was, I think I learned about San Francisco Randonneurs and PvP almost at the exact same time. It was probably in the
Yeah.
same day when I was just doing internet searches, trying to figure things out. So then I saw, oh, there are events for SFR, San Francisco Randonneurs, which I don't know why I didn't register immediately, but SFR also is suffer. Like
Yeah.
that's,
Okay. That's it.
like, it took me, I think it was this Eric Marshall shirt that I have hiding under here. When I
Yeah.
saw it, like SFR here, I'm
That's funny. Yeah.
like, oh, suffer.
I have the
Uh,
same shirt, by the way. I like it a lot.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Eric stuff's great. Um, but I'm like, oh, there's some events I could do. And this was 2019. 2020, I didn't do any rides. And we had the whole pandemic thing happening.
Yeah.
But 2021, I did. So only 2 years before PvP, I did 3 populars. That's all I
Okay.
rode of official events that year in 2021. But then, so my wife is great. She's super supportive.
Yeah.
So
She's
I came
also in
up
the
with the,
room with you. Isn't that right?
she is, yeah,
Okay.
she's over
That's
there
important.
listening to just
Yeah.
my part of the conversation and
Okay.
not
Good.
yours, but with the
Yeah.
headphone. Um, but I came up with the idea of, hey, why don't I volunteer and you help me? Uh, we volunteer to help with the overnight control for the Mendocino Coast 600.
Wow. Yeah. That's an
Having done 3
introduction.
populars so far,
Yes.
that's all I'd
Yes.
done.
The other
And it wasn't,
extreme. Yeah.
yeah, but I'm like, this is a way for me to meet some people and see what their physical state looks like because I hadn't had any direct experience with that. And it wasn't, this was still a lot of pandemic controls and concerns and, wearing masks anytime anyone else
Yeah.
is around and all of that. And there was a really low number of people who were in that event. But I remember one of them who was a little bit older than me was saying how it was elder abuse, that the
Yeah.
other person was making him ride as fast as they were riding. And that really stuck with me.
That's good.
But seeing that really, or like hearing their stories about the ride and then giving them some food and then seeing
Yeah.
them go out into the night, like appear out of the night and then disappear into the night.
Yeah.
That was and some stayed through far to the morning to get some sleep, but to see the different ways people were doing it and how they were reacting to the
Uh,
challenge.
Greg, can I ask you a random question? So your
Sure.
wife she doesn't ride, I don't think, does she?
She is, she does some writing. When we got married, 13 years ago, well, 12 and a half years ago,
Yeah.
um, we did a 4-month bike tour around Europe.
Oh,
And
right. Yeah.
she had done a lot of commuting. When I met her, she was already riding a bike and commuting to
Okay.
work in the Bay Area. And I convinced her to do this ride, and we did some preparation rides here, but really not enough. It was like, oh,
Yeah.
we'll get in shape on the way,
Yeah.
which started with hills in Italy.
Yeah.
All the
So
heavy
so
stuff went in my
yeah.
bags real quick.
So when you're doing this volunteering for the 600 Menda
Yeah,
Coast thing,
yeah.
did she share your fascination, or she just thought you were completely crazy for even thinking about this?
She has she has a background in doing competitive swimming,
Okay.
so the challenge interested her. And she didn't see it as just insanity. She
Okay.
saw it
Good.
as, oh, people are overcoming a challenge.
Yeah.
And to connect it to PvP for a moment, um, so she hasn't done any SFR rides yet, but she is talking right now doing the women's populaire that's coming up in
Oh, great.
March, the
That's great.
100K.
Yeah.
And she got a bike fit yesterday to fine tune some of the contact points to
Yeah.
help with that. But she was there watching a lot of people at the finish for PvP. And we can definitely get into this more when we're talking about the logistics of getting there and all
Yeah.
that. But when I finished and we'd had discussions about it, she was, talking about how like she was tearing up seeing some of the people finish, which I did too.
Yeah,
Like I just watched the GCN PPP video that I'd
yeah,
watched before, but there's a man who was like, was it seventh time, sixth or seventh time,
yeah,
like that. I guess first time he did it was in 1975, and he like fell over. I kind of fell over against a railing at the very end,
yeah.
and he was over time, but he finished. And she
Wow,
saw that and was
that's
telling me about it.
amazing.
And then I
Yeah.
saw it on the GCN thing. But she's like, I think I might want to do something like this after
Wow.
seeing like how people are responding to it and like
Yeah,
how moving of an
yeah.
experience it is.
Oh, that's cool. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
sorry. So you did
Oh,
the
that's right.
volunteering to get a kind of an idea of
Yeah.
PBP in general, and then
Yeah.
how did you formulate your strategy, your first series, etc.?
So it was my plan was to do the full series in 2022. And I did do a few, I did three 200s. And then I did a flesh,
Okay.
which a team was already trusting me to ride with them for 360 kilometers, including Greg Merritt, who
Yeah.
introduced me to a lot of people in the Randonneur community. Um, and I had met him on the second ride I did,
Yeah.
Del Puerto Canyon. Uh, and then I did a 400. I did another 200, another 300, or sorry, a first 300, um, another 200. But in 2022, I did not finish anything longer than a 300 other than the
Okay.
flesh. So I did do the 360 in 24 hours, but none of the ones with the shorter time. Then it wasn't until 2023. Um, sorry to jump back for a second. I tried Mendocino Coast in 2022. I DNF'd on it.
Okay.
And that was a very good learning experience for me because it was what I've learned, been taught this on several rides,
Yeah.
is you have to ride your own pace and you have to listen to your body and you have to think about, at least I know I do, have to think about heart rate zones and being sure you're not in the red the whole time.
Yeah.
It's like you want to stay out of your threshold heart rate zones as much as
Yeah.
you can,
Yeah. How far did you get in the 600?
all the way back to Cloverdale.
Okay.
So
Wow.
I made it to Fort Bragg and then threw up in Fort Bragg,
Okay.
um, and then outside the Safeway, uh,
Nice.
and then leaving town, got a flat tire, and then fixed the tire. Got to the overnight at the campground, and I was so hungry, but I was struggling with food.
Yeah.
And they made a grilled cheese for me, and I swear I ate the whole thing. I was there so long trying to eat it, but I'd taken one bite.
Yeah.
I just could
Yeah.
not eat.
Yeah.
Mm.
And
But
then Greg,
then I'm like, have to get over the hills.
yeah, that's
Yeah,
terrible. And
yeah.
not finishing that, did that concern you, or you just thought it was part of the kind of learning process?
It concerned me some, but then it gave me a lot of information to analyze and figure out, okay, what did I do wrong?
Yeah.
Um, and so it wasn't just the ride your own ride, but it's also figure out what you can eat and not eat. It's where I really learned that gels don't work for me. Like
Yeah.
cycling specific food doesn't really work for me. Like I need real food,
Yeah. Yeah.
especially when I get to the point where I'm so far gone. I get to that point where I'm like looking for something to
Really.
help me. Like I need real food that I can feel in my stomach instead of just something to squirt in my mouth like a gel.
So then 2023,
Yeah.
maybe just like high points of your sort of, or main points of your strategy, like how are we going to approach the actual ride itself?
Um, so the main thing to figure out was, although it actually didn't work out when I did PvP, but the main
Yeah.
thing to try to get better at, or I needed to get better at, was being very quick with minimal stops. So I needed to be really efficient when
Yeah.
stopping. And actually, Greg Merritt had given some advice on this, which is if there's anything you can do while you're on your bike, do it on your bike. Like
Yeah.
you don't need to get your gloves on before you start rolling. You could be doing that while you're rolling. Or like eating a little snack. Like you don't need to finish chewing before you start rolling. Like there are lots of things where you just want to keep that forward momentum. So it was about limiting my stop time, um, figuring out what foods would be agreeable with me after many hours of intense physical activity, and also learning how to push hard but not too hard. So riding fast enough to meet the times, but without wrecking my body in
Yeah.
um, when pushing.
And was your intention to ride with others or ride alone or?
So with that learning that I have to ride my own ride, my expectation for most rides has been that I'll be alone for most of the time. And anyone for most people who've ridden with me, they probably heard me explain this. But to me, randonneur rides, PBP, a 200, even a populaire, are like a lifetime compressed into a day of riding
Okay.
because people come and go.
Yeah.
You're with
Okay.
people for a while, you get
Yeah.
along with them really well, you ride with them for a bit, and then they stopped, they're gone.
Yeah.
And then you stop later, and then they catch up
Yeah.
with you. And it's so much like life where there's people you're really close friends with. You want to see them all the time, but you
Yes.
got into different things for a while, and then you get into the same things. And that's how I think of that all the time with rides. So
Yeah.
it's just your life compressed to a day of friendships going in and out.
There is a kind of a dreamlike quality as well, the way people kind of move in and out. I've heard it
Wait.
described as Burning Man because, first of all, it's a
Hmm.
big event, but you sort of meet
Yeah.
people, then they move on, might meet them again, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Before then, we talk about the actual PBP. Let's talk about logistics in getting to France
Hmm.
because that's always a challenge by itself.
Yeah. Actually, I want to jump back. This is part of
Oh,
logistics,
please do.
but it's
Yeah.
way before the actual getting there.
Yeah.
Um, when I first decided to do these long rides, I didn't know what bike I was going to ride. I didn't have any bike that I liked enough to ride that far that would be good for a ride.
Yeah.
And I did things completely backwards. I I know I want to do this long ride, and I had a custom randonneur bike built before I did that first populaire. And because it was middle of the pandemic lockdowns, and I have a childhood friend who's a frame builder out of Salt Lake City. I know him from Nevada, but he now lives in Salt Lake City, and it's Salt Air Cycles.
Yeah.
And he built the custom frame and fork for me. And I had these huge aspirations. And when I picked up the bike from him, he met me up near Lake Tahoe, and I did a ride with him. And I'm like, he is so much stronger than me. What am I getting myself into? Like, how do you get that strong on a bike?
Yeah.
I thought I'd ridden a lot, but then riding with him, it was very humbling very quickly. And he doesn't do randonneur rides. He does a lot of racing, like CX
Yeah.
type racing and
Yeah.
stuff. But I'm like, wow, okay, I need to ride a lot. But that bike is the one I've used for all the non dirt rides. So like the mixta or the others, that's what I'm usually on a cross bike. But this is my road bike, is this custom randonneur bike. But it came to actually going to PPP, had to get there. I knew I wanted to get there at least a few days before to acclimate, although I was kind of back and forth on, do I want to acclimate? Does it even matter when I'm going to be
Yeah.
riding straight through the night? Like,
Yeah.
when should my actual morning be? Does it matter? But my wife went along, and we completely lucked out. We were hoping to get an Airbnb or a hotel in Rambouillet. There was nothing. And then I think it was a month before I checked again, and we got an Airbnb within walking distance from the start. We were
Huge. Amazing.
so lucky,
Amazing. Yeah.
and we got it during the whole ride. And so a couple days before and a couple days after, and then she stayed there the whole time
Perfect.
and I mean, she did some day trips and things, but while I was out riding, that was her home base. Um, yeah, so we had a couple days. Like we flew into Paris, stayed the night there at a hotel, went to Rambouillet. Um, I had my bike in a Aura case. They one where it could take completely apart, like the Ninja case, I think it is.
Yeah.
Um, and then had to roll it around I think I beat up my body quite a bit just rolling it around Paris, getting to the hotel,
Completely.
lifting
Yeah.
it up and down stairs and stuff. My shoulders were killing me
Yeah.
from that. But yeah, we got to Rambouillet, and then we were there for a couple days before the start. Um, and then we were there for, yeah, like 2 more nights after PvP, and then we stayed in Paris for a few days and then
Yeah.
came home. It was a really
Yeah, it's
amazing.
wonderful you were able to stay right there because that makes
Oh,
so many
yeah,
things
we lucked
easier.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we were able to, keep things for a few other people who were on the ride, like, so yeah, just, like, store your stuff at our place. It's close to the start if you need to leave anything.
Cool. So then the actual event, you were in the X group, and
Yeah.
that's 84 hours, is that right? Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, 84 hours starting at
And actually,
5:15 AM.
and why that group?
I so when I rode Eight's Life Cycle, um, like, I like groups, but I also like not being in lines, and I
Yeah.
had this idea, like, how can I avoid lines?
Yeah.
So by being in the 84-hour group versus the 90-hour group, in my mind, at least, I'm like, I'll avoid the bulge and
Yeah.
the large group of people, although they go out to Brest and they come back. So you're gonna hit them at some point, hit the mass of people. But, uh, I liked that it wouldn't be as large of a group, and then I also liked that I would be starting in the morning instead of the first leg would be starting late at night. I I just had this idea like, "Oh, I can get one last decent night of sleep, and then I'll
Yeah.
ride."
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I'm not positive it was the best choice, but it worked out. Uh,
Yeah. And you
I'll
weren't
tell you.
yeah, we'll get
Oh, go
into it,
ahead.
but you weren't
Yeah.
concerned about losing 6 hours then?
Um, yes and no. I mean, I in the end, I would have
Yeah.
liked to have had that 6
Yeah.
hours,
It's called
but
foreshadowing. Okay, good.
yeah,
All right, sorry.
yeah.
Why don't you start? You tell me about your PvP ride and I'll be quiet.
Okay, so I'm not sure if you know him, and of course everyone who watches this won't, but I ride a lot with a person named Tak Noguchi, TAK is
Okay.
the first name, Tak. Uh, and I met him on one of those first populaires, and then we both talked about having these ideas of doing this ride. And I bring him up because he rode in the 90-hour group. So I went to see him off when he started. So yeah, so we like have video and photos of him starting.
Yeah.
I never saw him on the route at all, but I saw him start and saw him at the finish. Um, but we were over there watching some different groups go out because, it's like waves, like every 15 minutes, another wave. And, I was in the X group, but it was like A through Z and a plus and a plus plus. Um,
Okay.
but being X, you're very much near the end, right? You're one of the last groups.
Yeah.
And the, at the start, so having done these randonneur rides and knowing that you need to be supporting yourself in case things break. And like I use friction shifters with down tube shifters on my randonneur bike because I like things I can
Yeah.
fix.
Yeah.
And if I have a drifter and it has some plastic part break inside, I'm going to be stuck. Not that it happens a lot, but it's more
Right.
likely to happen than a down tube shifter is. But right at the start, someone I'd never met was just like, "Hey, I don't have a derailleur cable. My derailleur cable just broke. Anyone? Anyone? Anyone?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Here," like handed someone, just figured I'd never see him again, but it wasn't about that. It's like, we're just there to
Yeah.
support each other. Um, and then like 3 controls into I don't remember which location it was, but like 3 towns in, I see him. He's like, "Oh, you're the one that gave me the cable. Thank you so much." It wasn't quite long enough because it was long enough for a down tube shifter, but not a
Yes.
brifter. He said, but it was able to get him riding and he could use a couple gears. It just didn't have enough in it that he could get
Yes.
the full range, but it got him to the next control. So it allowed him to start PvP. And then he got help from a mechanic at the next place because I do
Wonderful.
have some mechanics at the controls, not all the controls, but many of them. Um, and this start was, 5:15 in the morning, dark. There's like a PA system where there's someone announcing and it's super loud, like
Yeah.
um, a, a whole lot of French going on. And I took 4 years of French in high school, but my French is horrible. My French is to say that I don't speak French. I think I can say it well enough that French speakers will say, will look at me crazy when I say I don't speak French.
You've nailed that one sentence. Okay, good.
Yeah, 100%. Parlez-vous anglais? Like, uh, uh, but yeah, it was anyone from the start will say this, but it was kind of crazy because some people are just totally in a rush to get out of there.
Yeah.
There's sudden like roundabouts at times. There's close to crashes. There's people suddenly stopping too quickly. You got to make sure you get some room in front of you. But within 10 to 15 miles, it starts to spread out more. And then there were times where I didn't see anyone around me in any direction, which was
Wow.
sometimes it was just a line of lights forever. Other times I'm like, where did everyone go? How am I by myself right now?
Yeah, cool. And then, so you were going very well for a very long time, and then things started going south.
So, so we talked about how, like I said, like it's like a life compressed into a day or into a ride. I ran into a lot of people from San Francisco Randonneurs on the ride who I'd never seen before. Just see
Okay.
a San Francisco Randonneur jersey, and suddenly I'm riding with them,
Yeah.
and it's like I won't call it divine intervention. It's just some kind of intervention. Like just suddenly here are these people you've seen their names maybe on a ride list, but never ridden with them. And I ended up riding with Francois. I think it's Clements, I think is how you say his last name.
Yeah.
But I ended up riding with him for like the first half, like all the way to Brest for the most
Wow.
part. And we broke apart from each other briefly here and there, but then we end up with each other again, and then ended up with other groups of SFR people. Um, but my plan, I actually have it here. So I have a big, you know, one of those box, people call them the lunch box, like big rando bag on the front of my bike with a
Yeah.
little plastic clear window on top. And I had right here, I had 3 different schedules that I printed out.
Wow.
1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
And there was like best case,
Okay.
worst case.
Yeah.
And then I like labeled like my Goldilocks plan, like in the middle.
Yeah.
Um, and my plan was, all right, let's go with plan one. My plan was get to the first overnight control, get to Ludiac where my drop bag was, and sleep 4 hours the first night. And then when I came back to Ludiac, returning from Brest, I planned on sleeping 5 hours.
Oh,
And then when I got
luxurious. Yeah.
to, yep. And then when I got to Mortan au Perche, the climb, that was going to be 6 hours. So I wanted to get, on the nights, I wanted to get 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours. Somehow when I got to Ludiac, here's something you don't have practice with for PvP doing SFR rides, going into a control and getting a stamp. So I'm so used to, okay, I have to go through the points on the map, especially having never ridden before the pandemic, these rides. So GPS, electronic proof of passage is what I'm
Yeah.
used to. So I like have to go through a point on a map, but I don't have to go in and talk to a person. And I don't have to go find a place to get a stamp and then walk a block to where there was food and then walk a
Yeah.
block to where there was a bathroom.
Yeah.
And my time just started evaporating at the
Completely.
controls. So when I got to Ludiac, I had a drop bag and a few people from the Davis Randonneur group, including Eric Norris, who has the Campy Only Guy YouTube channel,
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah.
which, yeah, which I watched. It is Eric Norris, right? I think that's
Yeah. I
his
think so.
name. I hope that's okay. I watched all his PvP tips videos. That was one of the things I did to prepare. And then Rob Hawks did a series also for preparation for PvP that I watched all of those, and those are all on YouTube still. But yeah, so they did a drop bag service. So that meant when I got there, like parked my bike, which, you know, they just have a bunch of pipes on stands that you hang your saddle from. So your bike stays there. And then you're like, where's the drop bag? Um, and then had to go find it, which is at the opposite side of this big school campus as where you have to get a stamp. Um, but got my bag and I'm like, wait, do I have to carry my bag all the way to get a stamp? No, what do I do with my bag? Um, but I decided in my mind, I'm like, oh, well, I'm going to be here and sleep here 4 hours tonight, or at least stop for 4 hours. So I'm like, oh, I'll take a shower, take a shower. I'm like, oh, well, actually, I should get food too.
Yeah.
And then I rented a bed that I'm like, my original plan was, you know, I'll get like 3.5,
Exactly.
maybe even 4 hours of sleep.
Yeah.
I slept for 35 minutes and then couldn't sleep. And then I got back up. I'm like, all right, I guess I'm getting back on the bike. But where did all the hours go though? Somehow all the hours I intended to sleep just were gone.
Yeah.
Um, And then
Yeah,
it
yeah.
waterfalled through the rest of the
Like
controls.
your point, Greg, of the distance between important things to do, it's very
Yeah.
far. And like
Yeah.
I did the drop bag service too, and in your mind you had to figure out, okay, I need to get this from the bag because if I
Hmm.
forget this thing, then I have to walk all the way back,
Yep.
and it's exhausting, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
mentally very
Yeah.
challenging, you know.
I recommend, I didn't do this, but I recommend
Yeah,
anyone who rides PvP, they also track the number of steps they take on the ride
that's yeah,
because it had to have been
completely.
over the, so yeah, there's like almost like around 40,000 feet of climbing, but there was probably
Yeah,
40,000 walking steps in addition
yeah.
to all the riding.
It's lots of steps interrupted by a bit of biking here and there. Very true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I slept on Strava. I put 2 hours total. I can't believe that's true, but I know when I wrote it, that's what I believed.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I know 35 minutes was the longest period of time I slept at any time during the whole event.
Wow. Yeah.
And I've picked up a habit from the event, which is I never took naps before, but I learned to nap on PvP because I figured out, oh, if I lay down for 15 minutes, sleep probably 10 of it, I can ride to the next control.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what I figured out. And those were I think I maybe got one other 30 or 25-minute sleep in addition to,
Yeah.
I don't know, like 4 or 5 15-minute ones.
So Greg, to go forward a little bit, I
Yeah.
remember I think you texted your wife. Was it
Yeah.
after Brest or before? And you were concerned that you weren't going to make the time, essentially.
I was having a problem with meeting the control close times.
Yeah.
And you're given this book where you get, your stamps for the controls, your stamps. But on the back, it says all the cutoff times for your group. And that means when the control closes. And, you have thousands of people who volunteered to help with this event, and they've been helping with it for days. And as right, they can only work there so many hours before it's like, we can't wait for someone who's going to arrive this many
Yeah.
hours late. But getting to Brest, the halfway point, I got there, I think I was like 30 minutes from the control time. So I was there in time to be ahead of the control close time, but I was really close. And I did it in like 38 hours.
Yeah.
And I'm like, my
Which,
total time is 84 hours. And the control time is, I mean, I realized the return will take longer than getting there because of
yeah.
the exhaustion. But if I just do direct math, shouldn't it not close until 42 or at least what a regular 600K cutoff would be, like 40?
Yeah.
But that it
Yeah.
but that it cuts off before that. And then every control after that, it was tightening down more and more. So the control closes, I was getting there after them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and the control close time would be the absolute last full control time. Because again, this tells me control time based on the group when I started. But the latest absolute control time close when they're shut down would be when that plus plus group, the
Yes.
XYZ
Yeah.
plus plus plus. So I'm like, all right, so there should be like another hour afterwards because like four more groups after me would represent an hour. Um, and I was, I'm like, I cannot make these control times. Does that mean that I can't finish? Like I think I can make the 84-hour total, but there's no way I'm going to make these control close times. And then I sent a message to my wife just saying, I don't think I'm going to be able to finish in time. Um, I think I can finish in time, but I don't think I can meet the control times. And I don't know if that means that I technically didn't finish because I didn't meet those requirements. Because
Yeah.
what if there's no one there to stamp my card because they're
Yeah.
gone? Um, Additionally, it was demoralizing coming into these controls because they were beginning to be empty. Like I would go in, it turned out someone was always there, even though like the third to last and second to last control, I think I was like 3 hours beyond when
Wow.
the control time was supposed to be. I'd go in and get my stamp and I'd come out and all the bike parking would be gone.
Oh my
And
God.
like there was almost no food left.
Yeah.
Like I
Yeah.
was there when they're
But
like, oh, kitchen's closed now. I'm just like, oh,
They're putting up
it's
signs saying "See you in 2027," that kind of stuff. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
So it's like, wow, they're just closing everything down. And I really didn't know, like, will I be able to get credit for this ride if I finish on time when I didn't meet those? And then I don't remember exactly where it was, but it was probably after 12 to 16 hours of thinking, like, I'm not sure I can finish, but I'm just going to keep going because I think I can do the 84 hours. And then anyone you talk to about PBU will say this, but it's the ride's so much about the people and like the people who live there and how giving they are. Like they set up tables all over. They're cheering you on in the middle of the night. Like you
yeah.
get to the top of a climb at 4 in the morning and there's just one guy up there clapping for you. And like, yeah, I'm like almost tearing up. Like I was like right on the
Yeah.
edge of tears right there because it's
So
such
special.
a deep,
Yeah,
uh, affecting feeling to see people like that. But there was a large group at a table, locals who were volunteering to help give food, give you drinks. And then there's some other riders there. And then I talked to a woman who looked like a rider and, and she spoke English. And she's like, oh, I've ridden PVP 3 times. I'm riding it this time, but I decided I'm going to DNF. So I'm just here to
wow.
help. I want to help the locals because they're so great. And she's like, oh, just so you know how it says like there's those control times, like how they close? Don't worry about it. Like it's only the end time that matters. And I hadn't asked her. Like
Yeah,
maybe there's a look on my face that I was worried, or she's like knew that I was behind. But her saying that changed everything.
completely,
I'm like,
completely.
oh, I can stop worrying about that. I can just worry about the end. And then there was always someone to stamp. But they were still closing. Like they were keeping it open to do the stamps, but the
Yeah,
other parts of it were shutting down around me. It felt like I don't know, being at a club late at night until the lights come on, and you're like, wait,
yeah.
why am I still here? Like that's kind of how it felt.
Yeah. You know, it's tough as well mentally when things are shutting down around you.
Yeah,
Also, when you're not sure if it actually matters anymore, if you've missed those times. But
yeah.
to push through is amazing, Greg. It really is. That
Thank
whole
you.
time thing by each control, it's always this kind of hidden. No one's 100% sure, but I think the
Yeah,
reality is it just matters to get it in within your time. You know.
I had one other thing happen that was also it wasn't like a real low point, but it was a discouraging part because I didn't
Yeah.
know what it meant, which was, you get like a little transponder, like in your number that you put on your bike. It has a little chip in it. So when you come into the control, they have something reading the chip, and then it reports to the website for PPP. And I don't know if it's because I work in IT or like why I pay attention to this stuff so much, but every time I'd come in, I would check the website to make sure it registered.
Yeah.
And one of them it didn't.
Okay.
But I usually would check right when I got there, like when I was eating, but I didn't check until right when I was leaving. And then I saw it as I was leaving that it hadn't registered that I'd gotten there like an hour and a half earlier. And then it was just like weighing on my mind. I rode like
Gee,
3 miles and then I'm like, I have to go find out. And I turned around and went
yeah.
back.
Oh
And
my
then
God.
trying to explain it to them, I probably lost another hour trying to go through
Yeah.
it. And they're like, no, but eventually they're just like, oh, it's fine.
Yeah.
We added you. But,
Yeah.
but I didn't
But
know if that would mean that they
yeah.
didn't think I rode the whole route.
But I think, Greg, PBP is this thing. It's full of these micro anxieties, right?
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
all about trying to minimize them, and they will arise. Like I had all those issues as well. I had a tire that may or may not hold air, that kind of thing. But
Yeah.
you're never certain you're going to finish until you get to this to the finish. So,
Yeah.
anything else you want to say?
Uh, one more thing about the ride. The So right before the ride, or like a month before the ride, a lot of people from SFR ordered jerseys that had the PvP branding on the back. They came in very late, like
Yeah.
couldn't get them to some people before they went to Europe. And I, was only going there a couple days before, but Rob Hawks had them where he was working in downtown Berkeley. And someone on this email chain's like, oh, can anyone else pick it up for me? This guy named Misha Zatzman, who
All
I'd
right.
never
Yeah.
met before, never met him ever. And I'm like, oh, I'll bring it. And then brought the jersey with me. And then when we did the San Francisco Randonneur photo at the Chateau in Rambouillet, That's when I met him the first time. He gave me some pastries as a thank you. And again, I'd never met him, but then I kept running into him over and over on the ride. He was super, super fast. I think he was in the Z group, but he would just blast away from us, disappear, and then he would
Yeah.
have really long stops. And he
Yeah.
would just keep
Okay.
doing that over and over.
Nice.
And
Yeah.
when I was at my worst, not worst point, but my most concerned part about whether I could finish was I was one control away from the end, really tired.
Yeah.
And I was about to go. I'm like, oh, I need to go. And Misha like showed up and he's like, oh, well, if you want to go now, I'll pull you.
That's so
And I
cool.
just rode on his wheel from Drew to the end. And
Amazing.
that probably saved me 15 minutes, maybe 30 minutes. Like I might not have finished in time,
Yeah.
but he's like, yeah, just stay on my tire. I'll take you in.
Yeah. And so you finished, it was 83 hours, was it? I think 33 minutes.
Right. Right.
Um, it almost seems unfair if you had finished with, we'll say, 86 hours, because
Yeah.
it's almost like a false kind of a time limit since the maximum is 90. But it didn't
Yeah.
happen that way, so it's fine. Last
Yeah.
point I'll make, which I think you just made as well. Looking at your moving time, it was
Yeah.
just over 56 hours.
Yeah.
And as I've said before, no matter what wave someone does, they always come in at either 54, 55, or 56 hours moving time. So it's really about that time off the bike and just
Yeah.
minimizing that time. It's so true. You
Yeah.
can waste so much time not riding. Okay. So, Greg, do you plan on doing it again?
Yeah. Yeah.
Nice.
I do.
Okay. And
Yeah.
what's going to be different?
I really need to figure out how to be more efficient with the time at the controls. Uh, and we didn't get into this much, but I'm vegetarian and finding food there was a challenge at times.
Yeah.
So whether I only use the controls, maybe more for get the stamp and go grab food somewhere else on the route,
Yeah.
I might do more of that just to avoid the
Yeah.
walking all around trying to find things.
Completely. Yeah.
That's and I'm going to sleep more somehow. That
Yeah, yeah. Your first experience sounds so like mine, right?
yeah,
All that just wasted so much time, didn't sleep at all.
yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, Greg. Let's then go to 3 tips that you would give someone who wants to complete PBP.
Uh, the main one is learn about yourself first, which you'll do through all those other rides, but let it happen and really take the lessons you learn from any ride on the way to preparing for PvP. So it's kind of 3 in 1, I guess, because
Yeah.
it's figure out what you can eat, like what's the best type of food for you. Figure out how hard you can push yourself. You do need to push right up against that and rides beforehand to know where your limits are. But don't ride anyone else's ride. Ride your own ride, and that does mean sometimes people will go ahead of you. Sometimes you'll be ahead of them, and that's fine. Just ride your own ride and what you're comfortable with. Um, uh, enjoy it. Like
Okay.
let
I like
yourself
that.
enjoy it. My take. Different people have a different thing they want to get out of it. For me, it was about completing it and seeing the countryside and experiencing the people. I can't, I myself can't relate to the people who race it.
Yeah.
And to me, they've missed out on all the things. It feels like rushing through life, right? Like, and
Yeah.
not
Okay.
stopping to smell the
Yeah.
roses. Like they just rushed through. I
Yeah.
stopped and had some blackberries on the side of the road. If you're
Okay.
racing to the end, you're not going to do that.
Yeah. That's true.
But some people that might be really what they enjoy, but figure out for yourself which experience you want to have and what you want to get out of it. And there's not a wrong answer there, I don't think.
No. Cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
I think that was 3. Did we get 3?
In a roundabout way, I think we did.
That's
Maybe
fine.
3.5.
That's good. Okay. Okay. Greg, thank you so much for all your information about 2023. Really helpful. As I said, very
Thank you.
similar to my own experience. And hopefully we're going to do the adventure series this year together. Is that the plan?
Yeah. Hoping to do that.
Okay.
Yep.
Talk
That's my
soon.
plan. Yep.
Take care. Bye
Thank
bye.
you.